Innovative open source projects made by incredibly motivated students, coaches, and organizations.
Good morning, everyone. Hi, I'm Ruben from Ghent University IMEC here in Belgium, streaming live from Ghent. Today I'll talk to you about the Solid ecosystem. Now, I recognize some people that have had a course of web development. In case you passed the course, you might already know what I'll be talking about. In case you flunked the course, well, then please stay because you probably need to retake this then. Nonetheless, Solid. So the thing is, usually these every 4 years in summer, we're very much looking forward to the Olympics. But as you know, a pandemic happened and this year there won't be any. But fun fact is that next Monday, it's exactly 8 years ago that the opening ceremony of the London Olympics happened. And in the opening ceremony, there was a guy who few people actually knew. But what he did is he sent out a live tweet, and it was this tweet and this man. Tim Berners-Lee sent out a tweet, "This is for everyone, hashtag London 2012. It was, as you can see, in July 8 years ago. Now, the thing is, few people knew who this man was, and even fewer people understood what exactly he was trying to say with "This is for everyone." Now, you might already know that Tim is a man who invented the World Wide Web, which is very crucial in all development, essentially, because without the web, there wouldn't be Stack Overflow. But when he tweeted out, "This is for everyone," it meant that he basically built a system that was intended to be used for anyone, regardless of where they're from, where they're going to, what kind of devices they're using, and so on. It was an open invention, not meant for profit, but meant to change the world. That was a vision when he started the web in '89. And while 2012 was already the point where things started drifting apart a bit, and eventually we ended up in something that looks like this. I get a question on chat that PowerPoint is not changing. Right now you should be seeing a horror scene in blue. Is that what you're seeing, or still my first slide? Yes, okay, good. I see some, oh, there's thumbs up cards here. Good. So for some people it's working. If not, it's your computer, not mine. So what I want to say about this one is, like, the web, sometime around 2012 actually started a bit looking like this. You know, see this guy popping up. This guy is actually a real person. He was a web activist who was jailed for a couple of years. And like, he went under in a time where the web was still what he wanted it to be. When he came up, basically, it was like, where had the web gone? Because nowadays, having an own website is not really important. What matters is that you're visible on Facebook, on Twitter, and so on. So basically, this is the balkanization of the web, in a sense that it all became different islands where you had to be part of. But then basically, yeah, the whole vision of this web for everyone stopped working there when suddenly we all needed the islands to be connected. So Solid, which I'm going to talk about today, the goal is that we reshape the relationship between people, data, and the applications they use, because this relationship is currently fundamentally broken. And if you want to remember one thing from this talk, be it the word choice, like, ultimately, Solid is about restoring choice on the web. Because today we've been robbed a bit about our choices. It kind of looks like this, where, you know, either you're on Facebook or on Twitter, or you don't matter, right? And this is a situation that we want to get away from. And I have 3 parts for you today. First of all, I want to talk a bit about this notion of this web being for everyone, and how it affects innovation. Then I'll talk about redefining that relationship between apps, data, and people. And finally, I go to the really geeky bits where we also talk about what will the developer experience look like if indeed we have this new relationship between apps, data, and people. So first, let's talk about universality and innovation. I'll guide you through the World Wide Web, where it comes from, where it's currently going. Then I'll talk a bit about the problem of centralization and concretely the issue of walled gardens. Before we dive into this, just a reminder, you are totally free to switch on your camera so I can see happy, confused, sad, distressed faces, anything you have to share. Also, I am trying to keep an eye on the chat, so if you have any questions, you can always switch on your mic, put them on the chat. Let's make this interactive so those who could make it live will regret that they couldn't. All right, first, the World Wide Web. So it's very hard to imagine what the world looked like before the World Wide Web, because in fact we're so used to the way things are right now. But actually, before the World Wide Web, if you wanted to exchange information, let's say just a piece of data or a document, it was really hard, because different people were using different hardware, different software, and so on. So basically getting, let's say, a document from your iPhone to somebody else's Chromebook would have been very difficult. As a result, it was also very hard to innovate, because if you were building software, you would have to say, well, actually, I'm going to build it for this specific machine with this specific operating system, and that's it. Whereas today, I guess many of you are actually building web applications with the goal of it running on different platforms. Maybe some of you are building something more platform specific. Then you also had to make a choice. But back in the day, you really had to make a choice. One machine, one operating system, and all the rest was pretty much expensive. Now, what the web adds to this is universality. And this is actually one of the most important characteristics of the World Wide Web, is that we strive to be independent of many factors. And we want people to be able to use the web regardless of what kind of device they're using, regardless of what kind of software they're running on the device, regardless of many things. And this also means that developers are free to innovate. You don't build for a specific platform, you build for the web. And because the web is based on standards, on open standards, everyone can build for it, and everyone can also write software to view whatever you build. And this is why the same website works on iPhones, Chromebooks, tablets, even devices that exist now, but that didn't exist when the World Wide Web was invented. So this is basically unprecedented compatibility over the ages. And there's few other systems that have been able to realize this. Now you could say, well, yeah, obviously, I mean, why wouldn't we do that? Well, yeah, it's not the default. If you're building an Android app or an iOS app, well, then good luck getting it to run on my computer. I won't be able to open it, right? So the principle of let data, innovation, and people be free doesn't always apply. We are, in fact, I think we're past the point of openness in certain domains. Like we have seen a peak of openness on the web, let's say about 10 years ago. Now things are going a bit back, but the intention, of course, is how can we get back to the original vision of the World Wide Web? Now, also important is that if you look at the a consequence of this universality is freedom of expression. We often say that anyone can say anything about anything thanks to the web. Like the web has given a voice to many people. Now, this is good. Also comes with some negative consequences because, you know, people just say whatever, fake news and so on. But still, the fact that we technologically are able to do that was very important. And even more interesting is that we all have our own spaces, so we don't have to agree, which is very different from, let's say, Facebook, for instance, right? Because ultimately, there's things you can post, there's things you can't post, and so on. Whereas with the World Wide Web, anyone can start their own website and you put on there whatever you want, but you're also responsible for it. Like if you put illegal things on there, well, the government is going to take you down. Whereas right now, if people put questionable content on Facebook, yeah, who's the police there? Is it Facebook? Is it the US government? What if I'm critical about what's happening to Facebook in the US? Will my opinion be censored or not? Those things, right? And even if we have our own spaces, we can still link to each other, which means if you're writing something on your website, if I want to say something about it, I just link. So we don't have to be in the same spaces for us to have conversations together. We do in our spaces what we want, and we just link around. And this is the real power of the web. And as a consequence, people started their own blogs and websites. They started sharing things on their own terms. And now I will sound very old, but maybe some of you are young to remember the times when everyone had a blog, whereas right now we just go to medium.com or we pick one of the big platforms because who is going to look at my website, right? So, but that's pretty much against the spirit of the web. The idea was that we'd all be free and we could just do whatever we wanted without asking for anyone's permission. What also came out of this idea of like, let's just put stuff online is a couple of platforms, because granted, 10, 15 years ago, it wasn't easy to start a website. Like you really had to have quite some knowledge. So it was for technical people like ourselves. And platforms like these, some of which have long been forgotten, made it easier for people to share things online. The consequence that they were not sharing things on their own sites, but on those platforms, obviously. Now, the counterpart of freedom of expression is permissionless innovation. Basically, this is what happens when you apply free speech to innovation. And just like I said, like anyone can say anything about anything, well, the innovation equivalent there is anyone can build anything for any reason. So if you want to build something, well, you're free. Just make something, set up your own server, and you're launched. You don't need Tim's permission or anyone's permission to join the web and put your innovations on there. And this is because the technologies are open. They're all based on W3C standards, as you know. I mean, if you're writing or outputting HTML, CSS, those are all standards. And the reason they work is because they're standardized. But the main thing is like you don't need permission. It could be like, yeah, obviously, why would I need permission? Well, look at app stores. If you're building an iOS app or an Android app, you need permission to be in the store. And if you build something that goes against Apple's interests, well, then you won't be in the store. Whereas you can build anything on the web, even things that go against the web's interests, because that's what freedom is like, right? So permissionless innovation, the idea that you can just innovate without having to ask anyone for it, that's a very, very powerful thing. And permissionless innovation has been responsible for spreading some of the crazy ideas like eBay, Twitter, Uber, Amazon. Like now I can just have anything delivered on my doorstep. And in fact, I hope they don't come because that would be embarrassing if I have to leave you guys. But the point being is that you can just get anything from the web. And this is all because of permissionless innovation. So that's like the web in a nutshell, like the good things, like the idea that, you know, open technologies, anyone can say anything, anyone can build anything. However, as you know, there have been some threats to this universality of the World Wide Web. Because the web was designed in a decentralized way. Like, there was a default at the time. The internet is decentralized. Email is decentralized. Like, I don't need permission to send you an email. You have your own mailbox and you can move it around as you please. So decentralization wasn't new when the web was launched. The new thing was universality. The fact that one piece of, like one web page literally, could be viewed in any kind of browser, any kind of device. That was a novelty there. Now, there's been a couple of threats to universality, and the first of them, well, there were the browser wars of the 1990s, and I'm almost certain that you are too young to remember. But what happened basically was you would often see those buttons like, this website is best viewed in Internet Explorer or Netscape, and you would have to switch browsers, which goes against universality because universality says the web should work from any browser, right? So if you didn't have a particular browser, well, too bad, you're out of luck. Which also means that people needed a certain computer, right? Because if it needs to be Internet Explorer, you need a Windows computer. And it also means that, well, if you want to watch it on a phone, you're out of luck because there's no Windows on a phone. I mean, they tried it, but it didn't really work well. So bottom line being is that if universality is threatened, it goes as far as obliging people to buy a certain kind of device. And if that had not been solved, well, we wouldn't have had smartphones with internet today because the web simply wouldn't work. So this is why universality is so important. It also meant from an innovation perspective that developers depended on Microsoft's pace. Like if Microsoft innovated slowly, and boy, they did innovate slowly, then, well, yeah, you would not be able to innovate yourself. Like, good luck trying to build a fancy web application if the browser is just too slow for it. So that was the situation back then, and what was quite, yeah, I mean, it could have killed the web, basically, because Microsoft was trying to take over there. Well, what happened to this browser war thing is nobody really won in the end, because what actually happened is that a new battle just replaced the old one. Because soon it didn't matter anymore which browser you used to browse the web. What really mattered was like, what is the first page that you used to get on the web? In other words, if your company needed to be on Google, and if you're not on Google, well, too bad, because people won't find you if you're only indexed on an obscure search engine. So the good news is, of course, like now, in this web, you could use Firefox, and it would mostly work, and Google would work on any browser, but it meant that, you know, companies had to optimize for Google. They had to tie their fate to Google. And this also was a point where, you know, having a high ranking in search engines became more important than having high quality content. So this is already where the seeds started of fake news and so on, because, you know, you had to rank high in Google. Whatever happens after that doesn't really matter. Also means that if you want to innovate, well, you better innovate in such a way that Google will index you and place you highly. Otherwise, it wouldn't really work. For instance, take things like let's say Instagram, which is mainly image-based. Well, Google doesn't index those things well. So those kind of innovations were harder to do back in the day. Now, how did this battle end? Well, same thing, it just got replaced by a new battle, which is still, the platform wars that we're experiencing today. Soon, it didn't matter whether you used a particular browser or whether you ranked highly in Google. What really mattered was like, are you on Facebook? And if you're not, well, too bad. And here, of course, clicks became more important than high quality content, which directly have led us into some of the serious societal and economical problems that we're experiencing today. I mean, it's crazy how technology has influenced society's reaction to a couple of things. But from an innovation perspective, this is the important thing. Like with Facebook, is you either compete with them or you depend on them. Simply said, I can build a website for my company and not be on Facebook. Well then, tough luck, because then I have to get viewers of Facebook on my website. Or I have to depend on them. I have to start a Facebook page and then I have to pay Facebook for advertising so people find my page. So again, this goes against universality, the fact that I can just do whatever I want without needing permission, because here I would exist by grace of Facebook. And not because it's Facebook, but just the fact that any party plays that role is problematic. So this is, against the background of the vision of the web, how centralization started happening in the past couple of years. And centralization has manifested itself very concretely with walled gardens. But before I continue, let it be known that this is not a social media story. I'm using social media as an example because we all know and use it. But the same mechanism is happening on many different fronts in different sectors, right? So we could even be talking about online shopping, for instance. Same thing, massive centralization. So when I'm saying social media, in your mind, generalize the examples to other domains as well. Now, the key problem is that our data has become centralized in a handful of web platforms. We've lost control. Things that would be on people's personal websites and blogs and so on, well, you will now find them on Facebook and Twitter. And we have to admit, they are responsible for a great user experience to the extent that even our grandmothers and grandfathers can use them. Whether that's good or bad, I'll leave it up to you. The thing is, they can, so they get a voice, which is nice. But we've lost control. So we're not in control of where our data is. Yes, it's easy to use, but when you put something on there, well, it's not yours anymore. Now, we all know this has far-reaching consequences for privacy, but guess what? I'm not going to talk about privacy today, only to tell you that I'm not going to talk about it. Because the bigger picture here is that the universality of the web is visibly threatened. And its universality is what makes all the rest possible. So let's leave this very narrow idea about privacy and let's take a step back and look at really what's happening here on a grand scale. And then you start seeing things like, well, you can read the rest of this article, but you have to sign in with Facebook. This means that if I want access to information, I need to be on Facebook, for instance. And being on Facebook also means accepting their terms. Or what you also see is, well, yeah, this website works better with a native app. So then we're not even using this universal browser. We are obliged to use certain applications which we don't control. Because that's a cool thing about a browser. It's yours. You control it. It works for you. Whereas apps, they don't work for you. And this has created basically the walled gardens of social media. You often hear it, but here's what it actually means. It means that if you want to do something, you either have to move the data or move the people. So it's 2020 and we're still, as people, moving data around between systems. Simple example, I cannot share a Facebook picture with my colleagues on LinkedIn. I have to either move the data, so copy the picture over, and then I lose control because my data is all spread out, or I have to move the people. I have to get my colleagues on my Facebook profile, but maybe they don't want to join, or maybe I don't want them on my profile. And so this is what we're doing today, constantly copying data around just to make sure that everybody can see what we want them to see. And think about it, how hard it is today to just share a picture with someone. Like, you went to, well, it's Corona times, but you went to, suppose we're allowed to go to parties. You take a couple of pictures, it's a birthday party, you want to share them with friends. How do you do it? Email them, put them on Dropbox, WeTransfer, put them on Facebook. I mean, it's very suboptimal. We just want to be able to give them basically. But no, we have to think about how we will move data around, which is crazy. Now, this massive centralization of our data, like every network tries to be a silo, tries to centralize our data. It hurts diversity, it hurts innovation, and it hurts choice. And think about it, if we're honest, if you can build one API integration as a company Will you integrate with Facebook or with some private identity provider? I mean, we need to do business, right? If you really want to make money, then you have to integrate with Facebook, as simple as it is. Even if we as developers might be very idealistic, I mean, sorry, but business is business. Which means that developers depend on centralized platforms for data and identity. Yeah, because if you say sell on with Facebook, then Facebook is the identity provider. If you say, can I see your current location or date of birth? Well, you have to get it from Facebook. And if you don't depend on them, well, you have to become such a platform yourself. You have to start harvesting data. But good luck competing with such big platforms, right? So it's not good for companies because they can't innovate, but people lose control of their data. It's for them very hard to switch. And if people cannot switch easily, if they don't have choices, well, then innovation is hard because you cannot innovate when customers have been locked in. And this is the key to me, that this whole notion of permissionless innovation. The web is so open that it even, paradoxically, allows for platforms that go against the spirit of the web. So if you ever ask, like, wait a minute, the web was designed decentrally, how come we ended up here? Well, this is because innovation is so free that you can do whatever, even if you have bad intentions. And some time ago, I read a perfect quote in The Guardian. I found it very visual. It said, like, the Facebook founder has no intention of allowing anyone to build anything on his platform that does not have his express approval. Having profited mightily from the web's openness, he has kicked away the ladder that elevated him to his current eminence. And I thought it was very visual that you almost see Zuckerberg like, thank you, Tim. Here's a ladder. I'm using the web as a ladder to just climb up. You know what? Once I'm here, kick away the ladder. I don't need you anymore. I'll just have my own thing. This is kind of what happens. So this is very anti-competitive, anti-social. It just destroys it for everyone else, basically. Now the question is, what can we do about that? Now, I'm not going to tell you how to throw over Facebook and start a revolution. What I'm going to tell you is, let's think differently. Let's look at the things that we can do if we want to go back to this more original vision of universality. I'll talk about how we can decouple data from applications, and then I'll describe the Solid as an ecosystem, and then I'll talk about the community behind Solid. Now, the same Tim Berners-Lee who invented the World Wide Web, he wants to do a mid-course correction to where the web is headed. Like, he's thinking about how can we take back control. And you might feel like, well, this guy is very idealistic. Like, does he really think he can change the world? Yeah, because he already has. So he's very optimistic about the fact that we have a shot at it. It's not a certainty, but there's an opportunity here. So what is Solid? Well, it's a way of building web applications where people can keep control of their data. And interestingly, if people keep control, more things become possible instead of less, as I'll explain in a bit. Now, Solid will combine existing W3C standards, and it will, using those standards, define how different actors in the system can interact. And just like how web pages function today, we're going to do the same thing for data. So it's not a new web, it's not a new technology stack like, for instance, blockchain is. We just built on the existing web with a couple of extra layers. And just like the web, the goal of Solid is to be for everyone. We want to bring back universality. It should work for every person. We also want to bring back permissionless innovation. So Solid aims to restore the choice that we've lost by separating data from applications. Because typical platforms today will store data inseparably from an application. Simply said, Facebook is both the app and the data. I mean, you cannot say like, yeah, I like the app, but I don't want to store my data there. Or more logically, I like my data, but I don't want to use this shitty app. Well, you don't have a choice. If you want to share photos online, this is the way to go. So these choices we want back, basically. And by separating data from applications, we create independent choices, right? And what we're really doing is we're getting the web applications back to desktop mode. So, right, if I want to share photos with you the old way, I would put them on a USB stick, give you a USB stick, right? And the interesting thing is, the software that I use to write those images is very likely different from the software you will use to read them. It's no problem because the data is free. So it's the same degree of freedom that we have for the USB stick, basically, that we want to do for the web. Like, can we store data somewhere such that different applications can access it under our control so that we're not locked into a specific platform? And this is what this would look like, right? So the idea behind Solid is one of a personal data vault, which means that every single person on the planet would get their own space to put data, just like with a website, really. But except of putting web pages there, you're putting pieces of personal data. And that simple idea changes quite a bit. Because the view that you see on screen right now is a view that we're very familiar with, right? It's a social media post. And nowadays, all pieces of data needed to build that view would typically come from one place: Facebook, Twitter, Amazon, whatever it is, like would be one data source driving the view. However, if we go to this vision of personal data vaults, if everybody gets their own space, and if you get data from there, well, suddenly a view like this one could be composed of data from 1,000 sources, maybe. For instance, if this is my social media post, well, this profile picture is going to be stored in my data vault because it's mine. This text that I'm writing, well, my post is going to be in my personal data vault. This image too. If any one of you reacts, if you read a reaction, well, this reaction is going to be stored in your personal data vault, and you will just link to my post. If someone puts a comment to your reaction, this comment is going to be stored in their data vault. And even a piece of data as small as a like. If you say, I like this post, well, this like is yours. It's going to be stored in your personal data vault. And then you see how a view like this one could easily be built out of, if I have 1,000 friends, out of 1,000 different sources. Everyone is in control of their own data. And this enables really cool things. If you say, well, actually, this comment, I'm making it to Ruben, but I don't want anyone else to see it, fine. That's your choice because you're in control. But right now on social systems, the visibility of a comment is the same as that one of the post. You could even say, look, this like, I want Ruben to see it, but I don't want this guy to see it. Or even worse, I want to put a dislike on this post, but I don't want Ruben to see it. I'm just going to show it. That's all possible. This is what really meaning in control is. And Peter remarks, this won't scale, right? You're absolutely right, but just a bit ahead. So Peter, hold me to this question. I will address that at some point. Now, what is the consequence of this? Let's first have a look at the consequence for people. Like, how does this change the web for people? Well, on the left-hand side here, we have the situation today where data and applications are inseparably connected. They're the centralized web applications. They create silos. And they come with a couple of problems. First of all, as I told you before, now you can see why it is so hard for me to share pictures from Facebook with LinkedIn colleagues. Well, the pictures are locked. They're stuck there. Another thing is a synchronization problem. Like if I accept an event on Facebook, well, Doodle won't know about it. So again, it's 2020 and I'm manually synchronizing lots of different systems because they each come with their own data store. Now, this is a sad situation because why would we be doing that today? Why would we, first of all, do all the manual synchronization work? And why would we be so limited in our choices? A prime example there is, have you ever tried changing your profile picture? If you change your profile picture, you have to change it in 10, 20 places. You're synchronizing data. And often 6 months or a year later, you still find the old ugly profile picture that you thought had disappeared, right? This is not being in control because your data is spread out. It's in all these silos. Now let's have a look at the right-hand side where we see decentralized applications. And those purple rectangles, they're still the same applications, but data has been pushed out. Data has been pushed into personal data pods. So this, for instance, could be my space, and I put all my data in there. And then it's easy to see because take my profile picture, right? My profile picture will be stored in my personal data pod. If I want to change it, I just change it there. And all the applications will follow because they're not storing it, they're reading it from my personal data pod, right? And this also means that I can choose different applications than the ones you choose. I can get started with one application to do my pictures. You can read them with another application if I give you permission. And this is a bit of the paradox. Like when I say people will take control, you think, oh, they will guard everything. But it's the opposite. Because right now we don't have control. And it's companies deciding for us who can access data. But if we say, no, I'm in control and my friends are allowed to see my pictures with any app they like, well, that's possible. And you see in the middle, there's this purple boundary there, basically. Well, this is me deciding which requests go in and which ones I'm blocking. So I'm always fully in control. And interestingly, this creates more choice rather than shielding it off, because I can decide what happens to the data. I don't have to decide what happens to the apps because they're separated right now. So this is why Solid is great for people, it's great for choice, but here's the kicker. It's also good for innovation, because The discussion that I hear today, when it's too much about privacy, it's very one-sided. Like, yeah, people supposedly want privacy, but how does this help companies, right? Whereas what I'm saying is, no, people don't want privacy. People want control. People need control over their data. And if people take control, it's also great for innovation. And this is the next slide. Again, the left-hand side is today. And today we have the single market for centralized applications. And it's a very boring competition because they're not competing on which app is the best. They're competing on which app has the most data. And let me give an example. Take the Facebook application, for instance. I mean, if we're really honest, who likes the Facebook application? I don't think anyone really does. We use it because that's where the data is. But the Facebook application is designed for the average user by definition, and the average user doesn't exist. Literally, grandmothers and grandchildren are using the same application, not because it's the best experience for either of them, but because that's where the data is. This is how they share pictures. So again, it's 2020 and we're all stuck with a suboptimal experience because of this coupling of data and apps, the average user. And what happens there is something very weird. You would think like Facebook is one of the, the tech companies in the world. Guess what? They don't innovate. It's striking. I mean, think about it. Which innovations has Facebook done to your newsfeed in the past 10 years that have been an improvement for you? And 10 years, as you know, is an eternity in IT terms, right? I don't think you'll find many innovations they've done. And there's more ads. I don't know if you find that beneficial. They have done one innovation, actually. Instead of just one like, you have now 5 different emoji that you can use. But, I mean, that's it. 10 years, 5 emoji. I mean, not even one per year. What I'm trying to show here is that they're stuck. They can't innovate because any kind of change they make, somebody will be a couple of million people will not be happy with it. So they have to stick to this average user is very, very limiting. For instance, one feature that we've said we wanted is like, show me more things I disagree with. Give me a slider, agree, disagree. Well, I'm not going to get that. Why would they? It doesn't help them. An even worse problem is that those companies who do want to innovate cannot innovate. Suppose that, you want to have a startup says like, I'm going to make a better newsfeed experience. I have a revolutionary new idea, or just even a simple idea. I'm going to make this slider like, show me more things I disagree with. Wow, tough luck. You won't be able to enter the market because you don't have the data. All that matters today is having data. Innovation is killed. Innovation is useless in a world where only having more data means that you win. So this is really, really bad for innovation. Like this being tied together of application and data doesn't help. Now on the right-hand side, we get a landscape that we get if people get a personal data vault. So then you get separate markets. Right? On one hand, you have a market for different data providers. And on the other hand, you have a market for different application providers. And this is not a winner-takes-all world. This is a world in which applications are being built specifically for grandma with big letters and big pictures. And also applications specifically for the fancy grandchildren with, I don't know, you tell me, I have no idea what's cool these days. But the point being is that this is a sector where you can build different products for different people and they can still interact with each other because the interaction goes through the data vaults, which are separate from the applications. So this is a world where innovation and cool ideas win. The same thing on the storage market, like your data could be stored, well, just like your website. You could host it with a provider of your choice, small or large, it doesn't matter. And if you're not happy, you can just move away. So that's the key to me. Like this is also good for companies because there are so many companies, especially here in Europe, who want to innovate, but they can't because they don't have the data. If people start controlling their own data, well, they don't need to harvest data anymore. They can just say, look, I have a service. If you give me access to these things, I'll give you the service. And then, you know what? I don't even need to keep it. You just keep your data. So this is the kind of the evolution that we're looking at. That was a principle. Now it's just more than a principle, actually. Solid is more than theory. It actually already exists. So Solid is a set of standards that make things interoperate just like the World Wide Web. And it's more than that. It's not a platform, like it's not a new X or Y. It's a set of standards. Just like the web is not a platform, Solid is not a platform. It's an ecosystem, it's a movement, it's also a community. It's an ecosystem in the sense that those standards enable interoperability. It's a movement in the sense that we need to shift the app builder mindset. We need to change the way apps are built. Because right now, if you're building an app, probably the first thing you do is ask information from a user. Give me your name, give me your email address, give me this, give me that, so I can help you. Well, if people have their data vault, you don't need to ask for that. They already have it, and you just ask permission to access relevant things, and that's it. And it's also community in the sense that it's different people and different companies, organizations building these things. And that's the good news. Like, anyone can build or host software for Solid. You can have a server at home, you can rent server space, you can use one of the free servers, it doesn't matter. Just like with a website, you can host data anywhere. So what is a server? Well, a server will act as such a data vault or a data pod, and it will store and guard your data. It's a normal web server, no magic there, but we add support for access control and for a cool thing called linked data, which you might have heard about. I'll talk a little bit about it later on. Now, the server is application agnostic, because often if you build a backend, you will build for a specific domain. You will say, look, I'm building a backend for a bank or for a retailer or for this or for that. No, Solid servers don't know about applications, just like a regular web server also does not know about applications. Simply said, Ruby on Rails doesn't care what you build with it, as long as you use it. Same thing with Solid. So a Solid pod is essentially a website, but then with data. A website consists of pages, while a Solid pod consists of small pieces of data under access control. And just like a web page can be viewed with any browser, well, a piece of data in Solid can be viewed with any application that has received permissions. What's in a data pod? Well, you name it. Same question like what's on a website? It's up to you. You could do the social media stuff like profile, picture, comments, likes, whatever, but like if you want to put videos in there, if you want to put documents, if you want, it's all possible. It's just like the USB stick, except it's online. Now, what are the clients then? Well, they are browser apps or perhaps native apps and that read from or write data to your data pod. And the idea there is that people give read and or write permissions to specific pieces of data, and they can give permissions to apps, to other people, to bots. All of those things are possible. This is what control means. And it's the goal of apps to deliver an integrated experience. And this is different from the web, because the goal of a web browser is to show the same information to everyone, whereas a Solid app will actually integrate data from different locations into a very personalized way. So this is where we depart from the web. What kind of applications can you build? Well, literally anything. This is the permissionless innovation again, right? We don't depend on data, so we can just build whatever we want. Calendar apps, social feeds. If you want to build a new GitHub or a conference organization system, everything is possible. This is why we do it, basically. So that's a sketch of the ecosystem. Now let me also sketch a bit what's happening in the community right now. So the Solid server, several applications exist. They're usable for developers. As the people of you who have tried Solid, and some of you are working with Solid, know it is rough around the edges. It's definitely not ready for end users, but as developers, we can get started. You can store your data with access control. There's a couple of places where there's free storage, but it's also just open source. If you follow this link, you can have your own server and run it. A couple of applications to browse your data, to do contacts, photos, and so on, and a couple of libraries that help you build Solid applications. Now, Solid started as a research project at MIT, where the initial development happened. But now it's evolving into a larger ecosystem where some startups are happening. Like Tim Berners-Lee himself is behind a company called Inrupt. And what he wants to do is not just get rich, but actually show people that's possible today to, have a profitable business while respecting people's data. It's leading by example, right? Because if Inrupt can do it, many companies can do it. And in fact, here in Belgium, we have companies like in Digita and Data Village who are also trying to find their way in this new economy. And it's working in interesting ways, actually. So what they're doing is like they're trying to open up the ecosystem. Because remember, it's not a platform, it's a set of standards. So we want to make this work for everyone. A couple of common open source building blocks will be maintained. So open source implementation of the standards will be tooling for developers and also some examples of services and apps that run on top of Solid. So this is not just like a pipe dream or a hobbyist project. There's actually some companies interested to look, how will this new economy work for us? Like what can we do to to enter this new era where applications no longer hold on to data? Good. I will pause briefly for a sip of coffee and maybe check if there's any immediate questions. Peter, I haven't forgotten about you. Good. Then we go to the decentralized developer experience, where I will actually get to your question, Peter. So obviously, this is a very new way of building applications. And because if you think about it, today, building applications is simple. With all respect for people who do it, it's a lot of work, but conceptually simple. Namely, front-end, back-end. Front-end people often know the back-end people. So, you just ask what you want, they will build it more or less, and then you interface with each other. It's really easy. It's easy building an application if you know the domain, if you know the people who write the data. Even easier if you write the same data that you read. Then, it's always your fault when you mess up, right? But if you decentralize, suddenly applications will start reading data from many locations. They will start reading data they have not written themselves either. So we have to be able to read each other's data. That's, as you know, insanely difficult. So that's a big challenge right there. And we also have to change the way in which we build applications, because right now, the way we build application is that we have this hard-coded application-specific contract, right? We have the client that sends HTTP requests to a backend, and you exactly know what you're sending because you know who wrote the backend and so on. But this is problematic. This way of writing apps does not work anymore because, first of all, you only are compatible with one server, whereas data can be on any server. And second is also the scalability argument that Peter has started talking about. Like, are you really going to send requests to 1,000 servers? How will it ever scale? So the idea that you know at design time what request you will be doing at runtime, that completely breaks down with decentralized applications. So we need to think about different ways of building applications. And this is part of what my research group is doing. So I have a research group of 20-25 people at Ghent University. Peter is one of my senior members there. And we solve questions like these. We solve questions like, what will app development look like in a future where data is not in a single location? And one of the pictures we came up with is this one, where we actually say we have to avoid that applications make specific requests to a backend, because if they do, the application will never scale. Instead, the application has to phrase whatever it wants in terms of queries. It will say, look, this is what I want to read, or this is what I want to write. It will have to delegate this query to some query engine. And this query engine will, at a runtime, translate the demand into concrete HTTP requests. And this is a cool thing, because indeed, sending a request to 1,000 different services is scalable. But maybe there's some aggregation or caching happening in the middle. And this is the job of this query engine. The query engine will say, okay, I know that conceptually I have to talk to 1,000 sources, but actually I know that there's some caches in these networks. So just talk to those caches, and I will get the same results without having to go to every source. This is quite complicated code, as you can imagine. But the good news is, this complicated code is shared across many applications. So if we build it once, we build it right, it can be reused. And the good thing is that this query engine can still evolve. So the application remains the same, even though the HTTP request might evolve over time. Not a problem. You just swap in the component that deals with the query translation, and then you will get different results. And so this is like this decoupling of HTTP requests to specific locations to just a generic engine is part of a scalability answer. But as you know, in IT, there's no silver bullet. We'll need to get all of the tricks out of the closet, such as aggregation, caching, and so on. In fact, we need to be so smart that we cannot expect applications to be all as smart, which is why we have to separate these. So this is my horizontal line there. The application itself needs to just express what it wants without going directly to the data, because that will never scale. Now, a core challenge will be interoperability. Because indeed, if we have to read and write each other's data, that would be a mess. And in Solid, we tackle those challenges through linked data in the RDF format. So here's a couple of those questions. For instance, if we all store our own data, how can we connect to the other people's data? And how can apps share data without all having to agree with each other? Because that's never going to happen. And finally, how do we integrate data from multiple of those data paths? How does that work? Well, each of those three challenges we do with linked data. Let me give you an example. For instance, this here is a like. I liked the Open Summer of Code 2020. And you know what? There wasn't a like button on the homepage, but I liked it anyway. Why can I do that? Well, because I'm in control. On my data path, I made this piece of linked data. It's JSON LD, so JSON for linked data, where I say, look, this URL, this is me. open summer of code, it's there, and I'm liking it. So I create a like in my own space. And I can just do that. Yes, I can, even though there wasn't a button. I could dislike something. I could have any emotion. Like, I'm not limited to the 5 ones that Facebook has. I can do whatever I want because I store my own data. So this is how I, in my data space, can like something on the other side of the web without their permission, because it's using linked data. So every piece of data is a link, and this is the essence of it. How do we do interoperability? Well, that's a more complex topic to discuss in a couple of minutes, but simply said, instead of hard coding to very strict contracts, we make them looser. We say, for instance, I'm going to train my application to recognize likes. Like, my application looks for something of this shape, and maybe your application will attach more piece of data to it, but I don't care. I'm just going to look for likes. So in that case, you can have an application that's just trained to show thumbs up, like, here are all the things that somebody liked. You don't have to understand the whole context. Right? So you only have to look at a very, very specific shape. So instead of having those contracts where you need to understand every part of it, we have this more shape-based way of looking at things. Finally, how can we integrate data from different sources? Well, linked data is made for that use case. If I like the open summer of code and Peter likes the open summer of code, we can just throw them together. It just works. And you could say, well, yeah, what's the magic then? Actually, try that. Try just taking 2 random pieces of JSON, concatenating them. You will probably end up with garbage, but linked data is especially made for decentralized integration. So this use case is actually very simple. So I can just get my like, Peter's like, all of your likes, it will just work together. So this is the real essence there. In the meantime, I see that interesting questions are coming. I will definitely get to them. Because I'll just quickly wrap up on like how we will develop apps for Solid, and then I'll get back to getting rich and have companies start with that. Now, the developer experience will be crucial to make Solid a success. Like, it's going to start from developers, right? And especially front-end developers are crucial in there because they're responsible for what people see. So together with people designing interactions, they're the ones bringing Solid. And a core part to me is that we shouldn't go too far. We being like, I'm one of the people working on Solid inside very technically. But if I try to build applications for end users, they're going to run away because I don't know anything about people, really. So I'm not the right person to build this. What I see my job as is enabling developers to build things because they're the ones that I'm going to build for Solid. And this is again the same principle of the web. Like, Tim Berners-Lee, thank God, did not build the first 5 websites because he's maybe not the best layouter. He just enabled other people to do it themselves, which is much more powerful because then everyone can do what they want. They can innovate, so you don't have to. So this, like, let's enable others instead of doing it ourselves, is a core principle. But interestingly, if I'm building tools to enable developers, I also make it easier for myself to build applications. So it really helps. But this 2-step process is it. Like, we're not just building the future, we're helping others, we're enabling others to build the future. This is what it's really about, permissionless innovation. So how will the average user be able to use Solid? Well, that's up to the developers in the sense that there won't be one average user app. There will be apps for, like I said, grandmothers, grandchildren, everything in between. It's up to developers to find a niche, to build something and to find out how am I going to convince those people, like what appeals to them, what are the apps they want to use and build them. So the average user, no, they won't be able to use Solid because there's no such thing as the average user. What we're really looking at is like people. What are the needs of those people? What is the app that they want to use? So the benefit is that we don't have to please the average user, which is a main problem that Facebook and LinkedIn have because they can only move as fast as the average user, whereas we can move as fast as we want because we diversify. Now, and the core to it is that when looking at developer experience, we should make the simple things simple and the complex things manageable. And if you've ever heard about linked data, well, you know, there's many people who think that RDF is a pain because they think it's complicated, but the truth is even worse. RDF and linked data are painfully simplistic, but they allow you to work with real-world data and problems that are horribly complicated. And indeed, this is a complicated world. If everybody stores their own data, it's a complex problem. So linked data by itself is not a complex thing. It's a fact that we're really doing something difficult, and linked data will in fact make it easier. But it also means that we'll have to teach developers how to work with data that can come from anywhere. Now, the old way of working with RDF is still inspired by the current APIs. Like, you just get your data, set an API call, get response back and parse it, then traverse the JSON and update the DOM, something like that. This is the old way of doing applications, right? And I see many RDF applications today being built like that, like just, get data, send a query, get RDF back, parse it, update the DOM. But if you're here, you know that this is not how applications are built today, right? The cool kids are doing more interesting things. They're doing things like React and Vue and Angular and so on. Nobody updates the DOM anymore. The jQuery days are long over. So what we need to do is we need to find abstractions that work with all those different libraries. So what works? For instance, here's a React example where you say like, welcome user.firstname. Here's your profile picture. And here's a link to your inbox, and here's a list of your friends. This is the kind of language we want to be talking. And what you may notice is those micro expressions in there, right? Like user.firstname, user.friends.firstname, and so on. Now, if you have a simple backend, then it's easy to build those things because every of those calls is just a single API call. But look at user.friends.firstname. I'm saying here like, get the first names of all my friends. Well, guess what? I store my friend list, but their first names, they store themselves. So this one thing is actually a complex query where we'd have to ask 1,000 data pods. What's your name? What's your name? What's your name? Right? Now, finding those abstractions is important. And one of them is one that you've seen. So those examples are real because there's a language called LDFlex where we have expressions like these, like data.user.name, data.user.friends.firstname. You can build those things. It looks like a local expression, but actually you're collecting data from the web. And which you can see in the very last expression where I say, look, this is my URL, get me my blog. I can do those things. And how does it work? Well, LDFlex is actually a domain-specific language for JavaScript. So I can have those expressions and they look like I'm just doing JSON in memory, whereas actually, even though it feels like a local object, we're using proxy to go to the web. So if you have this expression and you say await data.user.friend.firstname, you can actually get data from different places from the web. So I'm showing this because we need to think in different ways. Like we cannot expect developers, especially not front-end developers, to traverse the web themselves because there might be caching, there might be many, it won't scale if we do that. So we need to find those primitives that people can reuse across frameworks that make it seem as if just they're traversing local data, but actually they're just fetching data from all over the web. So the friends in this case can come from your data pod, but their names can come from anywhere. And by the way, these are live examples that you can try out. I will actually share the URL of my slide, so you can just, if it at least allows me in full screen mode, yep. So you can just try those examples. Another example of universality of the web where I can just share my slides and you can open them on any platform. So yeah, we need those developer primitives that will make it easy for them to get data from anywhere on the web. Good. Those were the 3 things I wanted to talk about today. Given that there's some questions on chat, I will jump into them straight away. So Peter has a question for me. Do you think there's an idea today which could make us rich? Like imagine in 1995 and you recommend me to build a search engine, but then it's 2020 now. And Kasper's question is related. He says like, how can we incentivize or even force companies to start using Solid? Now I will answer both questions with the same thing. The cool thing is I don't have to force anyone because believe it or not, companies want this. You can say, well, wait a minute. Why aren't they doing this yet? Well, actually, things are changing. Let me give you an example. 2 years ago, I had a machine learning company here in Belgium knock my door. They had won a prize with VDAB here in Belgium, which is an organization finding jobs for people. They had built machine learning that recommended good jobs to people looking for one. But they had a problem because, as you know, the way you make machine learning better is by giving it more data. But if they, as a small AI company, needed to get more data, it meant that they were in direct competition with LinkedIn, and this competition they had already lost even before they started. So they said, we don't want more data. We don't want it because otherwise we have to pay 50% of our staff on data collection and we'll lose anyway in the long run. We want to see people's data when they're looking for a job. We want to use it and give them the jobs, but then we don't want it. We just want to throw it away. And there's many companies like this because today, as I explained, we have a competition problem, especially in Europe. Our companies have not harvested enough data and now we've lost to the big ones. Well, we can do one of two things. We could try to beat Facebook at their own game. We could say, well, we're going to harvest more data than Facebook. First, good luck because they don't have the money. Second, good luck because GDPR. It's legally impossible to try to be the next Facebook because it just doesn't work like that anymore. So building a company today with, as a business model, data harvesting is completely broken. We need to leverage innovation here. So the fact that companies cannot get enough data is going to help them. Because with Solid, if we do it right, there's not going to be less data, there's going to be more. Because if I have a Solid part, I can show you data you otherwise would not see. Let me take another example. If I go shopping, I tend to go to Deleuze here close by. Deleuze knows what I have bought, what I am buying, and what I will be buying, better than me myself. They also know exactly how I'm walking in their store because I'm scanning my own groceries. What Deleuze really wants to know is what I'm buying at Colruyt and Aldi, but they don't. Guess what? If I have a personal data part, I can say, Deleuze, give me my data, Aldi, Colruyt, and then I can go back, say, Deleuze, do you want to see what I'm buying at your competitors? And if so, what do you give me? And funnily enough, legally speaking, this is perfectly possible. It's just technology that is leaping behind. So those scenarios show that if people are in control of their data, many more interesting things can happen. And stimulating this innovation is important. Now, the good thing to answer Casper's question also is that we don't have to revolutionize the world. We can start with small sectors that have a problem and solve actual problems. For instance, in healthcare, we have a problem with sharing data. We know it's very hard to get data from one hospital to another. We can make healthcare cheaper using personal data pods for patients and at the same time give people a better service. So this is a situation where both sides win. So how do I incentivize them? Well, simply say, look, if you do this, you'll save money. And there's a lot of sectors for which this principle holds. So incentivizing them is simply, you'll be more profitable. You'll be able to do your services in a better way because you don't have to actually harvest all the data. So I'm not going to convince anyone by saying, hey, you should do this because it's really better. I'm convincing them with saying, look, you'll make more money. As simple as that. So we always have to play this economic argument. It really matters. So Peter's looking for the idea to make us rich. Well, in this case, I would look at the sectors that have a big problem. Sectors like healthcare, like e-health, but also even in retail. And there are companies active today. So for instance, a Belgian startup, Digita, is like really looking at what kind of data management problems do companies have today? Because a medium to large size company will internally have literally hundreds of databases that they cannot integrate. So you can offer them like integration solutions. Say, look, give your employees a personal data pod, and then you won't have the trouble of people constantly moving data between systems. So there's quite a lot of data problems you can solve. And again, you don't have to convince people like, if you do this, there will be more privacy. Say, no, look, if you do this, people won't have to copy their data around 5 different systems, and you will be more efficient and you'll save money. So these are real opportunities. Like making data flow better is, I think, a very interesting business. Good. Meet, I'm looking at you because I think I have run out of time. I'm still open for questions, but I also had the idea that maybe I would just come say hi to a couple of different groups and listen to their pitch. Maybe that might be useful as well. So Meet, over to you.
You definitely still have some time left. Ro said something. So everybody can just pop in some questions in the chat.
Yo, I'll keep on answering then.
And how would you like to visit? Because we are on Discord and we are remote. Or how would you like to do this? Do we invite you? Or are you already in there?
Can you send me an invite? Yeah, I'll just try to pop by. I've never used Discord before, so you have to teach me. We'll see how that goes. I will try my very best.
Yes.
I'm an IT dinosaur, people, so that might be difficult for me.
I figured it out, so you can do it. Yes.
Okay. Good. So Rose says, some apps create data very specific to their functionality, like a retweet or a set reaction. With many different clients, would they not end up using the smallest common denominator of data items, or at least slow down innovation? Yes. This is a very relevant question indeed, which answering it involves a lot of detail, but the core aspect is like the shape way of thinking that I said. For instance, it's like let's take the sad reaction. Right? Suppose that One application, indeed, you can be happy, sad, angry, whatever. The other application only says, well, you can just do likes, basically. That's not a contradiction, because if the application is only designed to show certain kind of interactions, it would still work. But linked data is a bit more flexible than that. Like you can say, look, here's a like, and I found 5 other reactions. I can't display them, but I know they're there. Like I can show you, can link to them, you can use different applications to open them. And so this is a bit the way we have to think about. Now interoperability is a longer story, but we're also working on kind of, you could call them cookbooks, I suppose. That look, here's a recipe, you can follow the guidelines, and some people pour in more sugar or more butter. Those variations are possible, but as long as the lowest common denominator can be viewed by everyone, but indeed there might be extra features, that's a good thing. Because right now we don't have the option. Like if a certain platform doesn't give you an option, you have to move all the data just to get the one option from another platform. Whereas in this case, I can post a social media message and you can attach whatever piece of data you want to it because you control it. So the fact that you have the option of adding those new things is, if you think about it, an advantage. Of course, we'll still have to find ways to deal with it. But the fact that you don't have to copy over my data if you don't do something with it that's currently not supported, that's in essence a good start. Now there's deeply sensitive data that Bram is asking about. How would we store it, such as criminal records? Would it still be centrally stored by governments, or do you have a vision for this as well? So in fact, we do have a good collaboration with the Flemish government, and our Minister President Jan Bon here is quite enthusiastic about this sort of concept. In fact, he's an ITer himself that kind of helps. So obviously there are some interesting legal exceptions. For instance, take a criminal record. That's not just yours. A criminal record is, say it very loosely, kind of joint ownership between the Justice Department, and yourself. So you could say, well, I don't want this, I'm going to wipe it. Yeah, but there's others who have a claim to data. Because so far we have simplistically assumed that a piece of data just has one controller or one owner. In practice, there's many pieces of data that have multiple controllers. Another example there is, for instance, family data. If you have children together, well, yeah, I mean, who's going to manage their data? So there's something to be said for pods that are controlled by many actors. So these things will also exist. So right now I've just sketched you the very simple notion of just like one person, one pod. In practice, there will be co-controlled data as well. Certainly for sensitive data such as criminal records, health records, and so on. So yeah, those things will exist. Same thing with banking. Like obviously, the bank would be happy to give me a copy of my data of how much is in my bank account, but they will not delete their copy because it also matters to them. So we have to keep those cases in mind too. Then Casper, could we quick start the data collection by importing data gathered from major platforms? Yes, absolutely. Because that's a good thing. Like people often ask me like, yeah, great idea, but how will you kickstart this? Because our data is in those platforms. Well, this is why we have good legislation. In Europe, we have GDPR. I can say Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, give me my data. I can just put it in my own pod and start from there. The inconvenience is that today they will not read it back, but you know what? Once I've got my data out, I don't need them anymore, right? So indeed, quick starts like that are very much possible, and would be great to start building buttons like import my LinkedIn data, so that finally I don't have to type over my CV time and time again when applying for jobs. Good. Anything else? I've posted a link to the slides. They're online. They're even on GitHub, so you can comment as much as you want. My contact details are on there, so feel free to send me an email for inspiration, questions, remarks. Everything is definitely welcome. If you want to get started with Solid, a good point to start is solidproject.org. Last thing, any new legislation coming up that will help Solid forward? So very good one in the sense that the European Commission has invited me on a couple of occasions to ask, like, what is still missing in GDPR? And at the moment, there's two main blockers. One of them is that GDPR allows for a 1 month delay. So if I say to delay is given my data, they are allowed to wait for 1 month. So in practice, you have two types of companies, those that give you data straight away and those that wait exactly 1 month. It would be good if they removed that. If you could say, look, you know what, just write it to my pod already. The other thing is that GDPR doesn't, it says a structured format, but doesn't specify which structured format. It would be much easier if they already wrote it in the right format that I can use. So those are the important things. There's also there's of course also the recent Privacy Shield case and so on. But I mean, at the moment, as far as getting our data is concerned, it's quite all right. It's getting it timely and in the right format that can still improve. But in practice, we do have things. I don't understand how millions of users will be able to host their own server. Well, just like millions of companies are hosting their own website already in a sense, but that's an easy answer. So in practice, it will very probably be a local thing. For instance, we here in Belgium are having very concrete talks with the government on how Belgian citizens would get their personal data apart. And here's how the Belgian government thinks about it. They think that they will just certify a couple of companies, just like other utilities. For instance, in Belgium, we have gas, water, electricity with a company of our choice. Now, of course, not everyone can start an electricity company. That would be quite dangerous. So what we're talking today, for instance, is that telcos like Belgacom, Telenet, they could be pod providers. They already have devices in people's homes, so why could that not be a pod or a gateway to a pod? Also talking to banks. Banks store people's physical vaults. Why don't they also store data vaults? So the idea is that the government would certify a couple of providers and they can provide hosting. And here's the interesting thing. Every Belgian citizen gets a yearly allowance of free water, gas, electricity, and so on. Why doesn't the government also give them a free allowance of 2 or 5 gigabytes of personal data vault storage with a provider of their choice? So just like you can still choose your electricity provider, you can choose your pod provider, you get a bit for free, so the government can guarantee that you have some space available, but all the rest, you decide yourself what you want to do. So this is a way on how to get a kick-started, but the answer, I think, will probably be different locally. Like, I think we'll have answers in Europe and the States and so on, but à la limite, you could say that actually, just like you can get a website anywhere, people can get a data pod anywhere. But in practice, I think some government-supported things will get the ball rolling in Europe, especially because the government also knows that they can save a lot of money if they don't copy your address like 50 times within themselves, but if citizens just have a personal data vault. So this is the course that we're on, and it's not fiction. They're like, I mean, we have a concrete prototype with the government. We have these talks in quite concrete stadiums. So we have a shot at actually making this work. Good. I don't see anything else pop up. As I said, I'm always reachable. Meet, over to you, and I will try to join this Discord thingy, which everyone is talking about.
I'm going to send you an invite.
Super.
And all right, here it is. You can see it. Nobody else can. Thank you very much, Ruben. It was very enlightening, like always. And everybody that's in the chat right now, please pop me a line on Discord if you think that Ruben can come over, hear your pitch for a second, and maybe deliver you some valuable feedback or insights. You can always ask him some questions. So please do that right now, and I will see you soon.